Welcome to Cultivate the Ordinary podcast, curious conversations for the anxious, frustrated, and bored. I'm Travis.
And I'm Jessie. So often we're held captive by screens, schedules, and media that's mind-numbing and polarizing. This leaves us seeing dimly through a fog. We want to spark more imagination and a better awareness of God's presence in the everyday.
Join us on a fun journey of discovery and curiosity as we look at the ordinary through the lenses of joy, wonder, beauty, and hope. Well, we are really excited to have a special guest today, Rusty McKie. Am I saying that right? Yes, here we go. So, Rusty is about to release this summer, coming up, the book, The Art of Stability. Is like a modern practicing the presence of God by Brother Lawrence. It includes his experience as a pastor, spiritual director, and trauma-informed coach. Rusty's a trained spiritual director, formation coach, and founder of Steadfast Ministries, where he helps leaders survive and thrive in ministry. He authored sabbaticals, leads retreats, and hosts the Art of Stability podcast, which we've checked out and it's awesome. Rusty's also director of men's discipleship at his church in Central Florida. He's married to Rachel and has 3 lovely and lively children. Find more of his work at steadfastmin.com. We will share about that more later at the end as well. So
we are so thankful that you were able to join us, Rusty. Welcome.
Thank you. I've really been looking forward to this conversation and this time with you two.
Yeah, awesome. We have as well. Something that I so appreciate about you that you often have done on the podcast that you host is when you have a guest on, the way that you honor them with such a genuine awareness of their gifts and the ways that they just light up the world. And it's just been a joy to listen to all of those episodes. And many of the guests that you've had on are people I learned from in my own work. And it's just, I think that is, if I were to honor you, you're doing very, very good work with trauma and some of the work with leaders and, again, just ministry. It's hard, so thank you for having this conversation with us and for writing The Art of Stability, which we're so excited about.
Yeah, thank you so much for those honoring words. It's fun to be able to honor others, and it's also nice and enjoyable to be on the other end of that. So thank you for that.
Yeah, so go ahead and tell us a little bit more about your family and where you live, and maybe a little known fact about Rusty McKie.
Yes, so I have been married to my wife, Rachel, coming up on 19 years. That'll be this year. We have 3 kiddos. Our oldest is 11. His name is Justice. And our middle daughter, her name is Haven. She is 7. And then our youngest son, he is 4, and his name is Atlas. And they are our joy. We love our kids a ton. So we live in Central Florida. As far as a little known fact about me, I'm terrible at these kinds of questions, by the way, but to the best of my ability in answering this, I would say that I am wildly curious, and so that tends to kind of get distributed in a lot of different ways. One is with my people, right? So with my family, with my closest friends, like I am passionate and I am loyal to my people, and I'm really curious about them and what makes them tick and how to bless them and how to be blessed by them in both their gifts as well. And then I would also say, just in general in life, I tend to be wildly curious. I'd say a quirk of mine is that a hobby is that I acquire new hobbies, which is sometimes annoying for my wife. But I love deep diving and just learning about things. And I tend to take it to extremes. And this is both in like my work life and personal life. And, I wasn't drawn to just pastor a church. At one point I was drawn to plant a church and
Mm.
to start a new one. I'm not just drawn to buying pizza, but I want to deep dive in how to make Neapolitan style
Ah,
pizza.
nice.
I don't want to just buy good coffee. I want to learn how to roast coffee.
Yeah, yeah.
So that is a
Just
quirk of mine, is that I am drawn towards learning and about people, about the world that God has given us, and very curious, and I love enjoying those things to the fullest.
Mm.
I love it. Love the mining the depths of life. Actually, such a cool segue into really, I mean, even the vision for our podcast of cultivating the ordinary. I was going to ask you, how are you cultivating the ordinary in your life? It sounds like you live a life that just does that. It's like your lens of the world is what's around me and how can I go deeper and cultivate that. So, but if you would, is there anything currently that you feel like you're maybe more focusing on than you have in the past, sort of in your ordinary, or how would you say?
Yeah, I love that, Travis, and the dynamic of I would not have seen deep diving into various parts of life as cultivating the ordinary, but it is. I
Hmm.
think for me, as much as that's a blessing to myself and to others, it can also become a curse sometimes, in
Yeah.
that I just in general like to have a lot of irons in the fire. I get bored if I'm just doing one thing. And so if I have a lot going on, I've got my work with Steadfast Ministry, and I'm, written a book, and I'm working with my church, and I got my family,
Hmm.
and all of that is great, but it also can be my own little chaos that I make at times.
Mm.
So, a way that I have really intentionally been cultivating the ordinary has been deep diving into what could, and this has been a big source of prayer,
Hmm.
what could a morning ritual look like, an afternoon ritual, and an evening ritual?
Mm.
And within those spaces, my morning ritual is longer, afternoon is shorter, evening is even shorter because we have young kids and a massive bedtime routine. But within those spaces, what does it look like to have some foundational, ordinary practices
Hmm.
that then, with all the moving parts of my day in between, I'm creating at least three pockets where it's consistent. And
Mhm.
that has been very life giving for me in
Mm.
this season.
Oh man, I
Yeah.
love that.
I think about in just reading your book and this idea towards the end of homecoming, and what you're describing in this cultivating the ordinary and these little pockets, these rituals throughout the day. It's like you're coming back home. You're coming back home. You're
Yeah.
coming back home. And
Yeah.
I tell that to some of my clients, is that whatever helps you come back to yourself or come back to God, that these little incremental things throughout the day help you become more present and aware of God's presence with you. So that's beautiful.
Totally. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, okay, so we're gonna kind of dive right into, this amazing work you're about to release this summer, this book, The Art of Stability. As an author myself, I'm captivated by words and titles. This is a really captivating title to me.
Mhm.
And yep, and so there's one of my favorite lines is by the French writer. This is outside of the book, but Charles Perret, when he says, "We must always tell what we see. Above all, and this is more difficult, we must always see what we see."
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but, as I previewed that book, you have seen something. You're seeing what you see to write that book. This is something where, um, God certainly gifted you in this, the insights and your ability in writing. But there's something going on in how you're seeing the world around you to write this. So, can you tell us more about, especially stability as a focus point of even the title or the vision behind that book?
Yeah. It goes back a minute. It started after 2016, which many folks would say was a pretty pivotal moment in our history and in our
Mm.
country. And so just starting to notice externally and in culture at large just the instability and some of the shifts, some of the transitions that we were starting to make as a country after the 2016 election specifically. And then, all the subsequent stuff from 2016 to 2020 that maybe for the sake of our internal stability, we don't need to bring back up right now.
That's right. Thank you.
We all know, we all lived it, right? And
Yeah.
so the external instabilities was something that I was noticing. And I was pastoring at the time as well. And so then noticing in my own congregation some of the internal instability that was getting stirred up in folks. And one specific point there that I think I've noticed even before that, really my whole life, is just this disconnect that we can have between knowing the love of God and our experience of the love of God. And so this question that folks would typically in my circles frame it as, like I have this disconnect between my head and my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's always kind of been a question mark for me of like, okay, that's real. It's real in my soul. It's real in my life. It's real in the people that I'm living with. So what's going on there? So those two things, the external cultural instability and then some of the internal instability and the disconnect between what we say and talk about with the gospel and our lived experience, was like, okay, that's a lot. And that seems significant. So what's the answer?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that sent me on a journey of a lot of study, a lot of reading, a lot of listening, a lot of watching. And yeah, and here we are, 2024.
Oh man, yeah. Yeah, and I can just answer as sort of getting back to being able to preview and being honored to get to do that. If you, I really think that that was accomplished as a reader of that, and that you're, you do fill in those gaps, and I feel like really give us some places and answers to see, okay, where is this disconnect? Where is it happening in my life? Because of course those happen in different ways uniquely, but sort of also commonly. So I think I really resonated with like, oh yeah, that's a light bulb moment that you've sort of unmapped. You've taken us around this dark bend and shed some light in there. So I to kick this off, you open up the intro with sort of this tornado analogy, real life. You lived it in South Carolina, correct?
That's right.
Growing up, yeah, yeah. So, and I love the '90s Dr. Quinn shout out reference in there as well. So yeah,
Right.
yeah,
We lived it.
that's right, that's right. So that's the backdrop of like this tornado experience, and then you kind of take us into how this. I love the imagery of that. How this storm is raging. Maybe this is a bit later, also in the book you connected to that, but that where there's one couple that's sort of bracing for the impact of what's going to happen. There's this, so like you say, every sound, everything sort of heightens our, amplifies the fear and anxiety. And then there's this contrast with another couple anchored in, their confidence in the foundation of Christ. And at which point you also call the hiddenness in Christ, and how you've kind of, and wow, I mean, so one person or one couple is sheltering down and white knuckling, and the others almost, you actually say celebrating. That is so beautiful in the midst of the storm. So yeah, if you want to just say anything about that, or anything about sort of that's just, it takes us right away into instability.
Yeah. It's a wild thing that Jesus promises us peace in a troubled world.
Yeah.
Again, one of those things where post 2016, post 2020, you're like, how, Jesus? Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I hear it. I see the truth of it. I don't always experience the truth of it. And so it is a shocking moment to realize that in our union with Jesus, in our hiddenness in Jesus, everything that belongs to Jesus belongs to us. And the union with Christ, that's my favorite theological concept. And really, that's another way to describe this book, is what's the practical implications of our union with Christ. And so that idea of Christ's love, his joy, his peace is mine, despite what's going on around me. And yeah, we actually can celebrate
Hmm.
We actually can have joy. We can
Mm-hmm.
be sorrowful yet always rejoicing. We can be losing our lives and like lambs led to the slaughter, and simultaneously with Paul in Romans 8
Mm-hmm.
saying nothing can separate us from the
Yeah.
love of God, right? I mean, this
Mm-hmm.
stuff is all over the Bible. And for those of us who have had traumatic moments or experiences, or just the increasing turmoil of a society in transition, sometimes we can struggle to believe and have faith that, oh, yeah, I can actually have the love, the
Mm.
joy, and the peace of Christ.
Mm.
Oh, yeah, because it's already mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I like how you talked about even just that disconnect with the head and the heart and how
Mhm.
that is so real. I think we've all experienced it. Not everybody talks about it, um but we can get into this theological place of certainty and ideas and concepts and whatever. But then when instability happens, when trauma happens, when we can't get our footing, the storm happens, um, you don't feel it to be true. And so, what would you say? I know a lot of your book is kind of wrapped around just these different ideas of kind of awareness, right?
Yep.
And so, how would you say knowing yourself, reorienting, and coming home to yourself lead to a deeper sense of the presence of God and presence with others?
Yeah, that's a pretty key concept in the book and in my work. And it just makes sense once you start thinking about it, because if we're commanded, and we are in First Peter chapter 5, verse 7, to cast our cares on Jesus, to cast our cares on God,
Mm.
because he cares for you. And so if we're not at home in our own selves, in our own souls, if we're not getting close enough to what's actually happening in us, then we have no clue what our cares are. And so we can't cast those on Jesus. We can't cast those on others. I mean, one of the best things that we can ask our close friends regularly is, what do you need from me?
Mm,
Mm.
Or what do you want? And for those of us who work more in like coaching spaces or spiritual direction spaces, or just have friends who
yeah.
ask us those questions, we all know how difficult it is at times to even know what we need and even to know what we want, to be able to share that with friends. So part of coming home to ourselves is getting close enough to our longings, to our pain, to our suffering, so that we can say, oh, here's the care. I actually have some definition to it now. I
Hmm.
can now place it in the hands of Jesus. I can now place it in the hands of my friends. And then on the opposite end of that as well, some of us were so wrapped up in our suffering and our pain and our
Mm.
trauma that we have over identified with it.
Hmm.
Mm.
And so, in that sense, we need to be able to come home to ourselves. And by self, in that sense, I mean our truest self in Jesus.
Yes.
So, we need to be able to come home to, oh, I am not my suffering.
Yeah.
I am not my trauma,
Hmm.
not what has been done to me, although it was done to me.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And so I can hold that. That's part of my story. It's part of my soul,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
but it's not the truest truth of who I am. And so
Yeah.
coming home to yourself, getting close enough to what's actually happening in the soul, as well as getting really into the nitty gritty of who am I in Jesus.
Yeah.
It's
Mm.
essential for us to actually bring our true selves rather than a false self
Hmm.
into relationship with Jesus and others.
Right. And
Hmm.
I think just to expound upon that like when we because a lot of what Travis and I um kind of engage with is personality work and understanding patterns and I'm a resilience coach and
Mhm.
so when we talk about the false self,
Yeah.
like what you were sharing, it's like those traumas, those experiences, we
Mhm.
have this adaptive way of like like putting on the armor, right? Not the armor of God, but the putting on self-protective armor, you know? And we have our whole nervous system, everything is like, I'm going to defend myself, I'm going to be vigilant, I'm going to fight, I'm going to flight, I'm going to freeze. I have
Yep.
this response that God gave us for a reason to protect us. But there's situations that you got to lay that down. And that, like you said, not being over identified with the vigilance and the trauma and opening up and shedding that coat, that armor. So it's just beautiful. One thing I've really appreciated that you share as a resource is your Pause and Reset newsletter.
Yeah.
That has been a weekly um, place of goodness that I come back to because there's breath prayers. And what inspired you to start providing that?
Hmm. It's been a minute since I lived
Yeah.
that, so I have to think about what inspired me. I would say it was largely my own story of coming more home
Mm-hmm.
to my own body, to myself,
Mm-hmm.
not just getting awareness of the facts of my story,
Mm-hmm.
but how I have embodied that story.
Mm-hmm.
So that experience combined with more of my deep dive into the world of spiritual formation, training as a spiritual director, and just becoming more aware of contemplative practices.
Yes.
So, yes, in the same vein as the book, noticing all the instability and the chaos going on around, like, okay, well, what's
Mm-hmm.
a practical thing that we can do that gives us a little bit of a sense of, oh, I'm actually safe in the midst of all this chaos?
Mm-hmm.
And breath prayers are a great, a great time tested uh, practice that's been in the church for a very, very long time. And so it made sense to me
Mm-hmm.
to bring that into not just people's hands, but also to bring that experience into people's inboxes, which often can be cluttered and chaotic and have bad news, have triggering news, have, urgent respond now. They get
Right.
the automatic nervous system revved up and oh no, I got to deal with this,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
so, what did it look like to not just bring a newsletter that gave people more information? But my thought process there was how can I give people an experience in a space that's normally can be anxiety inducing or
Mm-hmm.
be compulsive, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That habitual checking in order to get a
Yeah.
sense of feedback and self from
Mm.
others and how they're reacting and responding to us.
Hmm.
Mm. For sure.
I love that. It kind of triggered a memory of we were on a previous episode with the director of the Soul Care Institute, and we were actually talking about spiritual retreats and kind of that experience, and she had said, and this is so classic American us, that someone in their frenetic pace, whatever, couldn't attend or whatever, and we all get it, but was like, well, can you just give me the information from it? And it's like, I mean, that reveals right there
They
our
would
wrong
pay.
thinking that no, I mean, it's the experience of entering into it, not just alone, but maybe in community. But it isn't this, here's the cerebral knowledge drop of how to, kind of, and I just thought that was an interesting, way in which we
Yeah.
even, yeah,
It
so,
totally is. And, in an odd way, we have embodied that mindset. I mean, we're Western
Yep.
thinkers. We are highly influenced by this idea of the intellect is
mhm,
good and the soma, the body, is bad,
right,
or
Mm-hmm.
they're at least separate from one another. And
hmm,
transformation equals information.
right,
And it's just like, oh my goodness, like, no wonder we find ourselves in a state where we can hear God is my refuge. God loves me.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus saves me. Uh, we can hear all these beautiful truths, and yet we cannot experience them.
right,
Well, of course, we're deeply conditioned
yeah,
to live in our heads and not live in our bodies. And so the pathway, one of the pathways I'm getting at in the book is becoming more, coming home to self, getting more in touch with your
Mm,
body
mm,
so that you can begin to experience life the way God designed it to be lived, which is we are embodied souls. We don't have a mind and a body. We have a
right,
mind body,
right.
as Daniel Siegel would say, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
All interconnected.
that's
for
great.
sure. Love him.
Very helpful. So, and that's really perfect segue, sort of where we're going next here in the conversation is, you in your book, you have a great quote by Parker Palmer on the soul. And you basically said, Palmer's words, the soul is like a wild animal, tough, resilient, savvy, self-sufficient, and yet exceedingly shy. If we want to see a wild animal, the last thing we should do is go crashing through the woods, shouting for the creature to come out. But if we're willing to walk quietly in the woods and sit silently for an hour or two at the base of the tree, the creature we are waiting for may well emerge, and out of the corner of an eye we'll catch a glimpse of the precious wildness we seek. So, which is such a beautiful way of just sort of visually thinking about the soul and that shyness and letting that space happen. You've already kind of set this up well and described the some. Any more you would want to say sort of about what does the contemplative way of life look like? When it comes to prayer, stillness, silence, solitude, kind of making that space for contemplation. What would you say
Yeah.
around?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the first to talk about it this way, but I love the notion that it is waking up to the love of
Hmm.
God
Hmm.
in all things, right? So this beginning to notice, this beginning to pay attention to, man, God is pursuing me with his love. Psalm 23, right? He pursues me all the days of my life. So not just knowing that, but experiencing that in an embodied way. So this waking up to God's love in all things, which the requirement for that is silence.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
We could even say, as modern busy people, the cost of that is
Hmm.
silence and stillness and waiting.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, the Parker Palmer quote going back to the idea of like coming home to your body, to your soul. You can't know what's there unless you get quiet. And uh,
Hmm.
I mentioned this in the book. I talk to people all the time, and they're like, I just want a more present life. I just want a more present life. I just want a more present life. And what most folks actually mean by that is they want to be more present to joy.
Hmm.
They want to be more present to peace, and they want to be more present to love. But to fully wake up to the love of God in all things, it means generating, growing the capacity to stay present to love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, fruitfulness, faithfulness, all those things, right? But also it means growing the capacity to stay present to pain,
Hmm.
to stay present to suffering, to stay present to heartache, to stay present to all the bits that we don't necessarily want.
Yeah.
And so silence is really terrifying for most people. And it takes some coaching, some companioning. It takes
Mm-hmm.
folks coming alongside them and saying, "Hey, I'll be here with you." And that's why retreat space is such a wonderful gift. That's why
Mm-hmm.
relationships like coaching or direction can be such
Mm-hmm.
a holy space
Yeah.
because someone's helping to say, hey, you're okay in this space. You can
Mm-hmm.
be okay with yourself. You can be okay with your pain.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I love all that. And, just taking us into that contemplative way of
Mhm.
this is kind of the path to get towards a more present life, right? With God. And you've already kind of touched on this idea of trauma being an obstacle to this experience, right? The
Yeah.
experience of the love of God. And in your book, you talk about the anatomy of overwhelm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So it reminded me some of my work with polyvagal theory and these
Mm-hmm.
states of dysregulation that we fall into with, which is trauma, trauma informed coaching stuff. But um, so could you share a little bit more about how that awareness of the body makes you become more present to God?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, awareness is such an important state for us to be in. Uh, Kurt Thompson in his work. So he's a neuroscientist, he's a Christian, the anatomy of the soul of shame. But in his work, he regularly talks about attention. And it really is the main motivator and driver behind neuroplasticity. So our ability to change.
Mm-hmm.
And so where our attention goes, there goes our life in a lot of ways.
Mm.
And so this ability to start to notice what's actually happening in our body is pretty significant for a couple reasons. Uh, a lot of reasons, actually, but two just brief reasons. The first would be when we are interacting with those more intense, challenging internal experiences, just some curious attention on that actually does calm down our bodies. It actually can calm down a hyperactive, over anxious mind. It can
Mm.
help us begin to experience, oh, I am actually more safe than I gutturally feel in
Mm.
this moment. And then as well, the book The Body Keeps the Scores and common vernacular now, or as Chuck DeGroat has said, the body keeps the story, right?
Mm.
Uh-huh.
Like there is a sense in which these sensations that we feel, both the ones that are attached to more consolations, to use Saint Ignatius language, more consolations like joy, love, and peace, or the body sensations that we feel that are more attached to some of the desolations, some of the suffering, some of the pain, some of the more challenging emotions. In both of those instances, we're holding them, we're becoming aware of them, and they actually have a lot of information for us.
Mm. Yeah.
So paying attention to the sensations calms the autonomic nervous system. It also gives us a lot of information. Our thoughts and what we think about our thoughts and the stories we tell ourselves, our meaning making, all of that is important information. And there's been a lot of discipleship in the church over that. But
Mm-hmm.
now we're in this new and exciting time where there's a realization of, oh, we're not just floating heads, we're embodied souls,
Mm-hmm.
and our bodies actually hold information that's telling us stuff too. And so with
Mm.
those sensations comes emotions and comes memories and comes images and meaning making and thoughts and things we tell ourselves. And so it's another way for us to kind of enter into the soul, to notice what's going on, so that we can then bring that to Jesus and friends.
Mm.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, some of it's just you hear this, and it makes me just want to pause and reflect on it because it's just like it. It's so true. It's the whole experience of the human condition. Bring everything to the cross.
Yeah.
Bring the burdens. Bring the joys. Bring it. Bring who you are.
Yeah.
To the one who sees you for who you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and to think of Jesus who went to the cross, who had a nervous system,
Yeah.
right? Who
Mm-hmm.
is being not just doesn't just feel like he's being attacked, but he is literally being attacked unto death.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he does not respond with fight, flight, freeze, or fawn,
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
but he has such a secure attachment with his father.
Yeah.
He has such a capacity, right? A window of tolerance, if we can use that language.
Yes.
Your capacity, your window to manage overwhelm. He has such a high window of tolerance, not just as God, but as a human, a healthy
Hmm.
human, a whole human,
Hmm.
that he can pray for his enemies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He can ask them, the Father, to forgive them. He can respond with love
Mm-hmm.
while he's being murdered.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's astounding.
It is.
Absolutely.
It is.
Very much.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think to go with that unpacking of how trauma can be an obstacle, you also mention in the book this concept of the dark night of the soul, right?
Yeah.
Which is a new concept for some people. They've not heard about it, but it's really just that feeling of aloneness or like God is absent. We maybe hit a season where it's just dry and you're just like, where are you, God? And the wrestling really is strong. So if you would describe for us kind of how you unpack the dark night of the soul in the three ideas or analogies: the storm, the desert, and the night.
Yeah, yeah. It is a new concept for some, but it's a very old concept in the church. Originated from Saint John of the Cross in the 15th century, Spanish theologian. He
Mm,
wrote the work, The Dark Night of the Soul,
Hmm.
and it's a beautiful work. It explains a lot when you're going through that season, which is very confusing, right?
right.
And that chapter where I talk about that obstacle to attentiveness with God, which is these more difficult seasons relationally with God, I break it down into the storm, the desert, and the night. And part of the reason I do that is because as the dark night language is becoming more popular in the church's vernacular, there is a sense in which some of these other experiences that are difficult with God are getting lumped into that one.
Mm,
And so I wanted to distinguish some biblical imagery around these difficult seasons. So if I were to quickly lay out how I talk about those in the book, the storm really boils down to external chaos. Even going back to earlier, what I started noticing after 2016 is kind of the cultural shift and chaos of like, oh, external circumstances are getting hard for people.
mm,
And if we were to think of like some of the core questions of our brain, and I talk about this in the chapter as well, the first would be, am I safe? And the moment that external circumstances start feeling unsafe, we really question our safety.
mm,
And so God, in a very mysterious and wise way, he actually uses the storms of life, the external circumstances where we don't feel safe, to actually teach us that we are safe in him. And he builds our faith in that, right?
Hmm.
The second would be the desert and the biblical imagery that we see there. So that'd be more the internal chaos that we experience, or the internal emptiness, right? That's another form of chaos. You think of the chaos of creation, that the earth was formless and void, and the spirit hovered over the chaotic waters. So there's like even this chaos in the emptiness and the voidness of it all. So the desert is that place of emptiness, and we feel like our internal resources are being dried up. I think of the beautiful, hard to read language in Hosea of God stripping away all of their idols, all of Israel's idols, all of their false pseudo lovers. And what does he say? He says, I'm going to draw you into the desert so that you'll come back to your first love. So in the desert, we tend to ask, am I loved? Because we're experiencing this internal chaos, and God actually gives us hope in the desert. And
Mm.
then when it comes to the night, that is more of this experience. It's really captured in St. John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, uh, all the old mystics in church
mhm,
history. They
Hmm.
all love Song of Songs, right? And so they're drawing from Song of Songs in these two places specifically in chapters 3 and 5, where all of a sudden the husband goes away, and the
mm,
bride is like, where'd you go? I'm searching for you. I'm out in the night looking, and I'm asking the watchman. And in chapter 3, she finds him. In chapter 5, it gets violent, right? She gets abused by people in the city, and she gets beat up. And oh, where are you? Right.
Hmm.
And so the night is this space of confusion. Is not the external or internal chaos. That's more of the relational
mm,
chaos that we
mm,
experience when God feels far.
Hmm.
There's also a sense of our relationship to the stuff of life. It doesn't quite do it for us anymore as well.
Hmm.
And
mm,
so that third question that we're all asking, the first, am I safe? Second, am I loved? Third would be like, am I empowered?
Hmm.
Do
mm,
I have agency in this
yeah.
life? And that very painful and hard experience of the night, the confusion of, God, it was so good, and yet now it seems like you're far away. Why did you, like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? in that experience, God actually teaches us that we do have the capacity to love,
Mm.
that we can grow and mature. We have the capacity to keep showing up in prayer and to keep coming back to Him, trusting His promises. So in each of these experiences, the storm, the desert, the night, I mean, God is doing mysterious work. It's painful work, but it's all ultimately growing us in faith, hope, and love,
Mm.
Mm.
which is a wonderful thing. And they're seasons, right? They don't last forever. They
Yeah.
come, and then we have times of rejoicing again.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And then we
Right.
experience them again. You know, it's not a one and done, and it's an in and out season of the soul.
Mm.
Yeah, that's really well said and just really good for some people new information, others just good reminders. I just, even to bring home the idea that in the backdrop of our lives in every moment, in the mundane, in the ordinary, God is at work doing
Yep.
mysterious wonders. That I think that's why I think often like nothing really is ordinary, actually. I mean, our ordinary is true, that's the reality and how we view that, but it's like whoever you might be sitting next to on a plane, what the hardship you're going through. I think of God. I grew up on a farm in North Dakota and thought
Mm,
of my dad, just this ongoing adversity in farming. Yet at the same time, this idea, I had a line once that hit me, while dad was growing wheat, God was growing dad.
mm,
That's our lives, I mean, in a way. And so it's kind of crazy. Like I wanted to pull a quote from your book to just
mm.
have you riff on for a minute.
Yeah.
And of all the things pulled, relational chaos was the thing, and you just kind of highlight. So we're kind of talking about that, and it really stood out to me because this is kind of bringing the conversation back as we kind of bring this to the home stretch about community. And I love what you say here. Kind of in an era where, there's just so much polarization and it's like some of us can't even talk to one another and we can't, even the family around a table and politics are brought up. It's just
Yeah.
our community just seems shredded. It doesn't seem like it's a place of safety or, even in family. And so I love what you said in the book when you say, how do we pick up the pieces in the wake of all the relational chaos around us? The answer is simple: friendship. Intentional, cultivated friendship brings order out of the swirling chaos of toxic relationships. Just like Adam and Eve, we still have an order-making mission. Love that. And hopefully, like St. Benedict's monks, we can bear witness to the goodness of Jesus by how we love one another. And then you kind of get into how, for some people, the church then is a place of not safety, and we all have compassion towards that. But that what if we are reimagined and looked at, and maybe a switching churches or whatever that looks like, but that the church is a place and it should be a place of friendship and coming together as Timothy Radcliffe, an English priest, talks about, is a place, church is a place where our eyesight can be refreshed and cleaned from what all
Mhm.
deforms our perception. So anyway, I mean, just anything you want to say about community in this journey and restoring some of the chaos from relationship
Yeah.
damage.
Oh,
I know it's a whole episode, or that's
how
a whole
much
other
time?
book.
Like, when
It's
do
a
I
whole
come
nother
back
book,
on?
right? Part two.
We can do a part
Uh,
two.
that's too big of a question to end,
Yes, that's
but
such
just
a pressing
yeah,
question of our day, isn't
yeah.
it? And even as you're saying it, like, I feel it in my body, right? I
Mm,
feel the tightness of chest and my
yeah.
throat tightening up because it's like, yeah. Oh, deep breath, listeners.
That's
Like,
right.
we've all lived it. We've
Yeah.
all lived it. Yeah, I would say that first we could say a lot, but some initial thoughts is, I think for so long with our culture, we had some shared values. And so even if people didn't buy into all those shared values, we were all just kind of able to like go with the flow together.
Yeah.
And that's obviously not the case of our world anymore,
Hmm.
specifically for those of us here in America or in westernized parts of the world.
Mhm.
So we are feeling. We are feeling the diversity of thought. We are feeling the diversity of opinions. We are experiencing, I would say, post 2020, a lot of folks with hyperactive nervous systems
Hmm.
who are mostly living out of fight, flight, freeze, fawn, all those wonderful things, right?
Mm.
And so, again, we got to start with ourselves. We need to come back to being home with Jesus in our own bodies
Mm.
and learn how to be a stable presence ourselves, which means that we are finding our hiddenness in Jesus, and we can be like the couple that dances with the storm
Mm.
raging around us. So
Mm.
that's the first thing that has to happen. Second, reflection here is I find a lot of folks in this conversation, they look out to the masses and they say, how can I love everyone? And how can I create a sense of belonging community with everyone?
Mm.
And there's a lot of reasons that people do that. One reason that I see pretty commonly is folks are actually doing that not from a place of stability and peace, but they're more driven from a place of anxiety.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so their need for everyone to get along has less to do with true biblical unity, and it
Mm.
has more to do with them trying to get something for themselves apart from Jesus.
Yeah.
So there's a driver in the soul that's saying, oh, we all need to be the church and we all need to get along and we all need to love each other. And because it's coming from anxiety, uh, some things can be overlooked in that, some important things, some important differences,
Mm.
some important injustices that are happening, right? So it can
Mhm.
kind of become this like peace at no cost kind of thing, or peace
Mm.
at all
Yeah.
cost, however you want to put that. So I find it helpful, yes, start with yourself and Jesus, and start with, and this is what I encourage in the book, start with a small group of friends that you can create and cultivate a space of safety and belonging there. And then at that point, you can go into your churches, you
Mm.
can go into your community deeply satisfied with Jesus and with your few.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can walk into spaces not needing something from others. Of course, we always need things from people. So I don't mean that, but
Sure.
not in a unhealthy, like craving, like I am
Right.
craving
Mm.
community
Right.
and I need you to be this way for me. But instead, we can walk in with open hands
Mm.
Mhm.
and we can walk in and say, oh, yeah, we see differently on that. And okay, well, let's talk about how we can be different and yet still love one another. Oh, you're getting really reactive right now. Okay,
Mm.
well, I can understand that. You're right. So we can enter
Yeah.
into those
Yep.
spaces with compassion
Yep.
Mhm.
because we've done so much work in silence,
Right.
experiencing the compassion of Jesus, and we spent so much time with those few friends sharing compassion with one another. So I,
Mm.
I think it has to be an inside out
Yeah.
approach, whereas a lot of folks, I think, set themselves up for failure
Yeah.
by saying, let's fix all the problems with everyone all at once.
Mhm.
And that's like, we don't have that kind of power.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well said on
Absolutely.
that. Yep.
I mean, I love what you're saying about that inside out approach and how I mean, when I've worked with parents and they talk about the chaos of the family and unruly children and all these things and they're
Yeah.
experiencing the storm, right?
Yeah.
Um, I always go back to you cannot kind of approach these challenges in your family until you can get grounded within yourself. And it
That's right.
has to start inside. It's an inside
Yes.
job.
Yes.
um,
You
Mm.
cannot heal reactivity with reactivity.
exactly.
It will
Exactly.
never work. The only
Right.
thing that heals that is love.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. And so
Yeah.
just going back to those like resets, like we said at the beginning, throughout the day, little regulating things where you have a moment with Jesus, silence, stillness, solitude, you know, um, just being in nature, being curious. Like you have
Mhm.
the ability to approach conflict with curiosity when you're at home, like you said, to your language. And so it's amazing. So thank you for sharing just a small bit of the goodness that your book contains. And I hope that listeners will check it out. We'll put a link in the show notes. And can you tell us more of how listeners can find you?
Yeah, the easiest way would be for them to go to my website, which is steadfastmin.com. That's not men as in male. That's steadfastmin.com. So yeah, definitely for folks to go over to Steadfast Ministries website, and that'd be the best way for them to find all the resources that I have available, my book, my offerings, as well as my social media accounts.
Yeah. And the book release date is July
the 16th.
16th.
Cool.
Perfect.
It's coming up soon. It's right around the corner.
Soon.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
excited.
Yeah, it is
excited.
exciting. Yeah. So yeah, and it is a gift to the world. It's a gift. I think I think the insight and your journey into sort of walking even with Jesus, I think I look at it as a trail that you're shining light on for the rest of us. So thanks so much for being with us, sharing your insights, just the things you've learned and the wisdom through the years that you've gained in your own journey, and then pastoring and shepherding others. Really grateful to have you on today.
Yeah, Travis, Jessica, thank you so much for the honor of being with you. It's been so fun.
Totally.
Yes, it has. All right. We'll see ya. Thanks for listening to the podcast today. I hope you found something helpful, hopeful, or thought-provoking. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to any resources mentioned in the podcast. And we also have links in the notes for our own resources to check out. We would really love to hear from you. And we're also really grateful for your support by sharing the podcast episodes with your friends and family and leaving a rating and review. May we all regain and maintain our wonder, hope, and inspiration as we look at our ordinary through new and fresh eyes.